I'm not here to talk about how human-caused warming has doubled the area of the West that's burned since 1984, although a recent study just gave that fact. I'm not here to talk about how the oceans have become 30% more acidic and are acidifying 10 to 100 times faster than they have in the last 50 million years, and that this is threatening the marine food chain, though that too has been documented. Or how natural weather occurrences like hurricanes are being whipped up in intensity and power, becoming more frequent and creating disasters around the world. And this is Superstorm Sandy. Or how scientists say the world is in the midst of a sixth mass extinction caused by our species, with a loss of diversity on the scale of the previous 5, the last being when the dinosaurs died off. And here's a chart showing just the extent of the extinction since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. You can see we're almost up to 400 species extinct just since 1900. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm not here to talk about how carbon emissions haven't been as high as they are today in almost 1 million years, and how temperatures rise and fall with the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. But it's true. You can see here that the blue is carbon dioxide and the white is temperature, and how they move together. The more carbon there is in the air, the hotter it is. And where we are now with carbon is right up where that little red dot is, higher than we've been in over 800,000 years. And I'm not here to tell you that there's more consensus in climate science than in medical science, yet nobody's calling modern medicine a hoax. The slim red line at the top, you could see there, represents the amount of disagreement about climate change among scientists. Very little. And I'm not even here to talk about how every national scientific survey, National Scientific Academy, states that climate change is real and largely human-caused, though that's true too. And that's an interesting way to get that up there. It came up all at once when I did it at home. What I want to talk to you about today, especially if you're a conservative, and I don't know how many conservatives we have here today, but you should be pushing for action to reduce carbon emissions, even if you don't believe that climate change is true. The particular flavor of action that I'm suggesting is a national legislation to enact a carbon fee and dividend program, as advocated by Citizens Climate Lobby. But first, exactly how would a carbon fee and dividend plan work? Well, it uses the power of the economy to leverage change. A simple rising fee in carbon would force a change in the way corporations think about their planning. They would go from quarterly thinking to a much longer term period. So carbon fee and dividend is a gradually increasing fee on the carbon content of fossil fuels, which would be collected where the fuels first enter the economy, and that would be at the wellhead, mine, or port of entry if they're coming from another country. The fee would start low at about $15 a ton of carbon and increase by $10 a ton every year. And that would be about, well, for every dollar per ton increase in the carbon fee, that would translate to about a penny per gallon of gas at the pump, or about 15 cents a gallon in the first year increase, and so on. That's if the cost gets passed along to consumers from the fossil fuel companies, which, of course, we know they will be. So, all money collected would be returned to households equitably, so that for 2/3 of households, primarily the low and middle income households, they'd get as much or more money in dividends than they would pay out in increased fuel costs. And you can see how monthly dividends cushion rising prices. And by 2035, that's in 20 years, a family of 4 would be getting about $400 a month in dividends, and that would be about $4,800 a year. So that's a significant amount of money. So how would this prompt the transition to a low-carbon economy? Well, raising fossil fuel prices would shift investments to clean energy, and it would also stimulate innovation as a result. There would also be a border adjustment levy on all fuel imports from countries that don't price carbon similarly, and then there would be a rebate for American companies when they're sending products to countries that don't have a similar fee. This is to keep a level playing field for American businesses. So it doesn't make government bigger, and both households and businesses would be motivated to reduce their carbon footprint as fossil fuels increased in cost. The plan doesn't increase regulations, subsidies, or government spending. And within a decade, clean energy becomes cheaper than fossil fuels, which is the whole point. And what are the reasons for supporting carbon fee and dividend even if you don't believe climate change is real? Well, there are lots of reasons. Here are a few of them. Fewer deaths from air pollution, economic benefits to households and the national economy. It's the best insurance policy, and there's broad bipartisan support for it. So let's look at those things individually. First of all, there would be a major reduction in air pollution and therefore fewer deaths from respiratory and other related illnesses as fossil fuel use was reduced. We all know that burning fossil fuels puts off a lot of other things that aren't good for our health, in addition to carbon dioxide, such as soot, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and mercury. And here's a chart of the reduced deaths over time from getting off fossil fuels. It would also reduce collateral cost of fossil fuel use, such as collapsing coal mines, exploding gas pipelines, and rail or extraction accidents. This is a rail accident. And we wouldn't have to support unsavory regimes by buying their oil. So, carbon fee and dividend would benefit local households. Citizens Climate Lobby did a household impact study which showed that in our district, 25, 83% of households would benefit or would have only a minor loss, less than 0.2% of incomes. And nationally, household benefits are very similar. 72% of households would experience either a net financial benefit or a minor loss. And here's a chart for our district. You can see where the biggest help for income is in the lowest quintiles, the poor and middle class populations. 93% would be benefited in quintile 1 and 83% in quintile 2. So carbon fee and dividend would also bring nationwide economic benefits, and there's 3 kinds of evidence for that. There's economic modeling, a survey of economists, and experience from countries that have already done it. So let's look at those individually. The economic modeling was done by Regional Economic Models, Inc., which was requested to do the study by Citizens Climate Lobby. They studied our proposal and found that in 10 years, there would be 2.2 million new jobs. Emissions would be reduced by 36%. 13,000 lives a year would be saved with improved air quality. And a family of 4 would be receiving $3,500 a year in dividends. And $85 billion annually would be added to our GDP. And this is the survey of economists. This was done by the Institute of Policy Integrity, and they are at New York University School of Law, and they surveyed a group of top economic experts on climate change and found that 84% agree that greenhouse gases create significant risk to sectors of the U.S. and global economies, and that 98% agree that placing a price on carbon would increase incentives for energy efficiency and lower carbon energy production and would actually benefit the economy. So now let's go to the examples of countries who've done this. Sweden's experience is that they imposed a carbon tax in 1991, and it's now at $150 per ton, which is a pretty hefty fee. And since that time, they've had a reduction in emissions while the economy has actually grown 48%, showing that we can cut emissions and also help the economy at the same time. British Columbia's experience is very much the same. They implemented a carbon tax 7 years ago, and they also have reduced emissions and also increased their GDP in relation to the other provinces. So, and also the public really likes it because they lower their taxes. So the bottom line is this system works. It would also be a smart insurance policy. And we had this experience with the ozone hole back in the early 1980s. President Reagan initiated an international meeting in Montreal that resulted in the Montreal Protocol, which addressed the problem of ozone depletion. Although the scientists at the time were not 100% sure of the cause of the ozone hole, President Reagan thought that the consequences of not acting were just too horrendous not to take out a little insurance policy. So they did that. They had an international agreement and cut out the chemicals that they thought were causing the problem. And as it turned out, the scientists were right. They did get rid of those chemicals. The ozone is now beginning to heal, and we avoided catastrophic damage to people and planet. So we need an insurance policy regarding climate change too, because the results of climate change are equally horrendous. Another reason to support this would be that something worse than carbon fee and dividend could come along as a solution. Public opinion favors action, so we will definitely have action, legislative action at some point, sooner or later. So wouldn't it be better to choose the best solution rather than something that maybe we don't want? According to the Yale Project on Climate Change Communications, 68% of American voters support this approach. And we all know, at least most conservatives know, that carbon fee and dividend is preferable to regulations, ad hoc bans like the Keystone Pipeline, and subsidies for technologies that may or may not ever be profitable. So who supports this plan? Well, lots of people. Why is it not moving? Well, I don't have to have it. Can you fix it, or should I just proceed without slides? Oh, there we go. Okay, so here's one of the people that supports this plan, Dr. James Hansen, former director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, former Treasury Secretary George Shultz, Greg Mankiw, advisor to President George W. Bush, and many others. Here's a list of conservative thought leaders, and I don't think you can read them probably, but they've endorsed a carbon tax or carbon fee and dividend. And this is only some of them. This is not a full list. Also, large companies are prepared to pay a carbon fee. Oops. Here's an article from the New York Times on that topic. And some countries are already factoring in a carbon fee in their business plans. And that includes major fossil fuel companies such as BP, ExxonMobil, and Shell. That's pretty astonishing. There's also broad international agreement that we should act to reduce carbon emissions. And we should be leading in this effort instead of lagging behind, which we are now. And some of the evidence is the Paris Climate Agreement that was just signed, Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition, the U.S.-China Emissions Agreement of 2014, and the fact that many countries already have some form of carbon pricing. And let's look at those individually. The Paris Climate Agreement was signed by 191 countries, and it's now ratified. And it basically said we're going to hold the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. And we'll aim for less than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And that is to reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. The Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition was actually formed during that Paris conference. And its goal is to add carbon pricing to all national strategies by 2020. And it's made up of UN agencies, 12 national governments, 5 subnational governments, and more than 60 businesses, again including fossil fuel companies such as BP and Shell. Then we have the top 2 polluters, China and the US, agreeing at the end of 2014 to limit greenhouse gases. China will cap carbon emissions by 2030 or sooner, and the US will cut emissions 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by 2025, which is more than previously promised. So we upped our ante a bit too. Then we have all the countries that already have carbon pricing, which is a total of 48 and 20 subnational jurisdictions. And Canada just announced this month that they're going to be starting a nationwide revenue-neutral carbon fee starting in 2018. Of the 10 largest economies, only the US and Russia have no carbon pricing. So if we want to stay competitive, as other countries reduce their carbon and develop low-carbon products, a carbon fee would help US companies to be competitive in foreign markets if we did that. And as you can see, this kind of legislation can pass in Congress, and there's a reason for that. There's now bipartisan agreement that Congress should act on climate, and here's a list of the evidence that that's so. First of all, there was a Gibson resolution in the House which says, it recognizes that there is a problem with climate change and that it says that Congress should do something about it. That was sponsored by a Republican and has 14 Republican co-sponsors. We have a Republican climate working group in both House and Senate now. They are working to pursue market-based solutions to protect our environment and climate while bolstering clean energy innovation. And we have a bipartisan climate solutions caucus also in the House. That now has 20 members, 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats, and they come on board only if they have a member from the other party that's willing to come on with them. So it's always going to be half Republicans and half Democrats. Their purpose is to develop and explore policy options that address the causes, challenges, and impacts of climate change. And then there's polling by the Young Conservatives for Energy Reform. They have done a poll that shows that young Republicans do support climate action. A revenue-neutral carbon-based fuels tax was strongly or somewhat supported by 58% of the respondents who were ages 18 to 35. And the Democrats come in with 7 carbon pricing bills that have been introduced in Congress. So far, there are no Republican sponsors or co-sponsors, but we think that that's possible to happen in 2017, given the above things, the increasing interest of Republicans in this issue. So, a carbon fee and dividend plan would be good for our health, our economy, and our incomes. There's wide support for it as the best solution, and Congress is poised to act. Really, there's no good reason that we would not want to act. And we don't want to wind up having to depend on this solution. Can you all read that? A carbon fee is the price of civilization. Let's get it done for future generations, if not for ourselves. Thank you.